Morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in this world of ours. I truly hope you are safe and, above all, healthy. I'm Aaron David Miller, and welcome to Carnegie Connects, a set and series of virtual conversations, at least for now, on issues of critical importance to America and to the world. Today, I'm truly pleased to welcome the U.S. Ambassador to Israel, a friend of mine, longtime friend of mine, and a friend of the Carnegie Endowments, Thomas Nides. Mr. Ambassador, and I will call you Mr. Ambassador throughout the entire interview. Welcome to Carnegie Connect. It's really good to see you.
Thanks, buddy. I call you Aaron David Miller.
You can call me anything but late for dinner.
All right, man. You should, and you should feel free to call me anything you want as well. Thanks,
man. Let's start with a few easy questions. You've been at the job now since December, which in Middle East time is really not very long. Give us a sense, if you can, of how you're approaching the job itself.
Well, first of all, can I just a moment of a personal connection? I will people understand. Aaron's my pal, has been my friend for many, many years. He and I worked together in administrations, but most importantly, we worked together at the Wilson Center. And he was my first call that I made when I was nominated to be the ambassador to Israel, because I don't think there's anyone I know personally who has the breadth of knowledge, the understanding, the political sense of what can get done, and without an agenda. So I'm just want to tell you thank you, Aaron, for being my friend, but giving me advice and counsel, and not shying away from telling me when I'm not doing something the right way. And I'm sure I'll hear a little bit of that on this interview. So thanks. Listen. If many people know, I don't really have an ideology when it comes to Israel. I care about one single thing, which is my North Star, which is to preserve a democratic Jewish state. Everything I do and everything I think about is within that context. So, very clearly, my priorities was number one, to make sure that this kind of belief and reality, this unbreakable bond between our countries, that I continue to articulate. Everywhere I go, everywhere I say, everywhere I move, I continue to repeat and remind people there's an unbreakable bond between the United States and Israel. There's an unbreakable bond between Joe Biden, President Biden, and in Israel. There's a guy who calls himself a Zionist. He's been to Israel multiple times, probably more about the region than any single living or dead president. And so I'm honored for that. Second priority is to make sure that the security of the state of Israel is first and foremost in all of our minds. And you all know that through the MOU, through the $1 billion commitments, through continuation cooperation from the Defense Department to the IDF to our Shin Bet and Mossad and all the things you need to know. So security, number one. Two is to keep the vision of a two-state solution alive. Aaron, you and I have talked about this many times. Listen, I'm under no illusions here that I'm going to be getting a moment in the Rose Garden where they present me with my Nobel Peace Prize, but we can make sure that we as an administration keep that vision alive. I think it's important for the region as well, and take care of the Palestinian people at the same time. And then lastly, I work on a lot of the economic issues. Listen, these Abraham Accords were hugely successful, very important. This is the reason why Israel can defend itself and is the strongest of the world stage, is they have a very robust economy. Economy is driven not only by technology, but many industries. So the combination of all those things and many, many more are kind of my priorities as I think about this ambassadorship. And let me just start right away. It's the greatest honor of my life to represent the United States of America and Israel, where, by the way, the U.S. United States, America, is very popular here. So it's nice to be in a place that people love you, not me, maybe not necessarily myself, but certainly love the United States of America. So it's a great, great honor.
Yeah, and above all, of course, carrying out the president's policies and, as you well know, safeguarding the interests of the United States, which is, Israel occupies a critically important place in the region. And is one of our closest allies and friends. I want to come back to this in a minute, but let me ask another question about your perceptions. What surprised you the most? In looking at and analyzing Israel and Israelis?
How close we are on security issues. I knew it intellectually. I was, as you know, I was the Deputy Secretary of State. I've been involved in this for a long time, but it should give comfort to both Israelis and Americans who care about this place. The defense cooperation with Israel goes both ways. The IDF and the DoD. It's not just from the generals or the guys in the corner offices. It seeps throughout the security agencies, and it is really the core part of this relationship. And it gives me, and it's not, but we use the benefit of Israel as well. It goes both ways. They help us on intelligence gathering as well to keep the United States secure. We help them obviously with theirs. But this relationship is ironclad and very important in the psyche of Israel, and it's real. Sometimes you talk about things and it becomes a perception, but that I think is obvious to me. The reality of this is, I was saying to you before we started this, everyone cares about this place. It's remarkable. The two words I probably should not have used is "come visit," because everybody is coming to visit, and not just my friends, but it's remarkable. I've had 75 members of Congress, 78 members of Congress. I had lunch today with two of them today. Every day, members are coming. Governors, mayors, people who have big contributors to UJA. Every temple president. I mean, everyone cares about this place, and not just Jews, Arabs, Christians, Indians. I mean, across the board. So I'm astonished. A country of 9 million people, who, by the way, as we know, today is celebration of Israel's independence. It's the 74th year of its birth, as they say, and I was honored to be at President Herzog's house just 42 minutes ago as I drove from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv to do this. So it's a great time to be here. It's a beautiful country, and it's a great honor.
Yeah, I mean, given your personal schedule, "come visit" are two very dangerous words. I sense that. In terms of your own personal observations, what do you think Americans don't understand about this place? Single greatest misconception, misperception.
Well, I think, first of all, I think it's clear that Israel deeply cares about the relationship with the United States. I mean, like, as someone told me who was a former foreign minister of this country, you can't be the prime minister or leader of this country without people believing you have a strong relationship with the United States. So that people, I mean, I think you understood that intellectually, but it's in the grain of people here. It's a comfort level. It's a connection. It's part of the moral fiber of this place. And I think, to me, people don't recognize, even when we disagree, and we disagree all the time. You disagree with your friends all the time. It's just, but at the end of the day, you cannot get sideways with the United States. And by the way, it goes both ways. American presidents have a hard time going sideways with the state of Israel too, because it's such an important country in a lot of people's minds, both Jews and Christians, and across the spectrum. So that is kind of I don't know if it's a misperception, but I want to emphasize how important that is. And listen, and just to be clear, they are living in a very dangerous neighborhood. I mean, I sit here and, I have sadly went to all of the shivas, 14 shivas since the last month and a half, of victims of terrorists. It's you don't know it till you walk into a family that a kid who's 27 years old, and I'm holding the hand of his girlfriend who he just got engaged to, and know that they, just literally a block from here, 2 blocks from the embassy, two 27-year-old kids got shot by a terrorist, not just the terrorism that happens here, but they're in a pretty lousy neighborhood. You got Syria and Lebanon, you got Hezbollah, and that are constantly a threat. You've got elements in Gaza who are continually threatening. And let's not forget that little country called Iran. So they live in a very, very dangerous neighborhood. Yes, they can defend themselves without question. But let me tell you something. It's not for I did an interview for the Jerusalem Post, and the title was, "It's not for the faint-hearted." It is not for the faint-hearted, that being an American ambassador. So it is a very complicated neighborhood.
One more question before we moved on to the nature and character of the relationship. I went back and checked since the 1940s, since independence, 1948, I think there have been 13 or 14 U.S. ambassadors to Israel. The vast majority of them have been foreign service officers, careerists. There have only been 3, I think 4, who have been political appointees. Now, I've known foreign service officers that are great. I've known foreign service officers that aren't so great. I've known political appointees that are wonderful and political appointees that are not wonderful. So I guess the final question on the personal side is, what do you think makes a really good American ambassador? Not just to Israel necessarily, but what is it that you have to have in order to be effective, to carry out the president's policy, to safeguard American interests, to understand the nature of the country, their sensitivities, their fears, their hopes, their aspirations? What kind of person does it take to be an ambassador?
God, that's a great question. I mean, I think it takes, first of all and foremost, you are the representative of the president. So you better be in sync with the president. So if you have a different ideology or a different view or some sense of what you think, this is not about Tom Nides. This is about representing Joe Biden. That's an easy thing to do here because Joe Biden calls himself a Zionist, cares deeply about this place. So that's an easy part of the job. Remember, for a place like this, not only is it a massive management job because one of the largest embassies in the world and complicated by how the embassy is split, it's a sense of deeply caring, caring about the country in which you're in and making sure the Israelis know you care about the country, right? The Israelis in any country, they want to know that the person that's in that seat cares about them, but understands that you're the representative of the United States of America. Ambassadors tend to come to these countries and get clientitis. I'd like to say that they forget they're actually not the ambassador for the country. They're actually the ambassador to the United States to the country. And so I think it's imperative that people understand that, but they can't feel when they watch you on television that you don't understand what they're going through, to understand what the pressures, especially in a place like this, going through the terrorist stuff that I've been through. They understand that I deeply care about these people and deeply care about the security, and that I am representing the United States, but my heart is here to help them get through that. So it's an emotional connection. And listen, you want to get stuff done. One of the biggest problems and one of the benefits, to be honest with you, I love the Foreign Service. I've had many, many, many Foreign Service officers work for me. I think they're some of the best and brightest human beings I've ever dealt with. In a place like Israel, one of the benefits is to try to get stuff done, which is not easy to do, both here and getting the State Department and the White House to do things. For me, I think being a political appointee helps because I can take probably some more risks than other people that were not particularly political appointees. I didn't need this job. I don't need this job to my next job. I just really want to do the right thing. And I think that helps me a little bit be a better understanding ambassador. But listen, I think it is. In fact, you and I actually talked about this. When I got nominated, you said, they need a political ambassador in Israel. This is a very political place. Mm-hmm. And I was with the Prime Minister. I had several meetings with the Prime Minister today. I had talked to the President Herzog 3 times this morning. I had a quick 20-minute meeting with the Foreign Minister Lapid. That was just today, and this is supposed to be a holiday. Okay, right. So this is a very important and complicated place, and you need people who can understand that.
You know the story. I don't think it's apocryphal, although I'm trying still to confirm it. When the late Secretary of State George Shultz met the outgoing U.S. ambassador to country X, he had a huge globe in his office. That I know to be a fact. And he'd ask the outgoing ambassador to point out the country. What is your country? Shultz asked the ambassador. And 9 times out of 10, the ambassador would point to Ghana or Kenya or the former Soviet Union or China, and he put his finger on the United States. That notion that protecting American interests is critically important, and the override overriding objective of diplomacy and U.S. ambassadors is critical, particularly in this relationship. Because as you know, there have been ups and downs and tensions. I worked for Republicans and Democrats, some of whom had very stormy relationships with the state of Israel. And there's a feeling in the last 20 years, I would say, that increasingly the cohesion that has bound the two countries together, which is a high coincidence, Mr. Ambassador, of interests and values. That's what makes the U.S.-Israeli relationship so unique. There's this high degree of coincidence of interests and values, that those interests and values have begun to diverge. I've heard some people describe Israel as Venus and the United States as Mars. Do you think that in any way a fair assessment that in fact there has been more stress in the last 20 years on that confluence of interests and values, that it has not been good for the healthy, resilient relationship? Is that a fair critique, do you think?
No, I don't think it's a fair critique. I mean, listen, this is a country that was born out of necessity. Okay, Jews had nowhere to go. The country is 74 years old. It's a democracy, and a democracy in a region which, again, there's not many of them. Right? You know this better than I do. It's a democracy with all the ups and downs of a democracy. Complicated governments are coalitions, right-wing governments, left-wing governments that last a week, governments last 2 years. A place that has seen multiple wars in its short birth. A country that's got very complicated issues vis-a-vis the Palestinians and other problems within this country. It's a country of 9 million people. Listen, this is a complicated place. You've made your career of focusing on this place, which we, as you know a lot about. So I don't listen. At the end of the day, what brings us together are two things: this unbreakable bond between the United States and Israel, without question. It will have ups and downs. There'll have critiques. There'll be complications, but it's unbreakable. And two, we're a democracy. The United States is a democracy, and so is Israel. And I think that's very important for us never to forget. And that's ultimately, at the end of the day, that's what keeps us together in bonds. Are we going to have disagreements? Absolutely. Are we going to believe that they're doing things they don't want to do? Without question. They're a complicated coalition of government in this current government that's going to cause us all sorts of anxieties. But I just think it is the people worrying about the breaking of the bond between the two countries, I think, is a complete misnomer. And friends argue sometimes, but at the end of the day, they're friends.
Right. Well, in fact, you worked in the previous administration, the Obama administration, in which there was a pretty fraught relationship on issues that actually divided rather than brought the two countries closer together. One was Iran, which we'll talk about, and the other was what to do about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. No, I'm not. I mean, the bond has been resilient. In fact, one of the most extraordinary things I think is that the two countries have managed to manage their differences. But sometimes I get concerned about the nature and health and strength of this relationship as you get a certain divergence, particularly in the values proposition, which I think you're right, is really the glue that binds the relationship together. Let's move on to Israeli domestic politics. Henry Kissinger famously said, he was exaggerating, but there is truth here, that Israel had no foreign policy. It just had domestic politics. I think the average length of an Israeli government since independence, since 1948, is 1.9 years. How do you deal with, and you're dealing not with a coalition cabinet crisis, but you're dealing with I don't know what you'd call it right now, a hiccup in the Israeli government, which no longer has a majority. How do you deal with turbulence and unpredictability very often of Israeli politics?
Well, let's step back for 1 second. So I'm a little bit biased here. I think I speak for the administration. We really like this administration, this government. Personally, as an American Jew, this is a beautiful thing, as Bennett says. I mean, you have a prime minister who is center right, first keeper-wearing prime minister, I think. You have a foreign minister who is probably center, maybe even center left a little bit. You've got a cabinet full of some very conservative people, and then you have a cabinet of merits and labor, very left, and you have Mansour Abbas, the first Arab to ever serve in a government, an Israeli government. How cool is that? How unbelievably beautiful is that? As someone, I don't care who you are. This is a democracy led by a coalition, led by people with all sorts of different ideologies, all working towards one objective, which is to keep Israel a strong democratic Jewish state. So I am, listen, there's no question it's complicated, man. I mean, I was with Prime Minister Bennett today, and, you know, I don't envy him trying to manage this in a way that keeps the government together. It's complicated. Every day he has to work it. But he is a friend of the United States. We're a friend of his. The alternative prime minister, which is Foreign Minister Lapid, he's also an unusually great human being as a human being and as a foreign minister. And I could go through the whole cabinet. I deal with all of them. You know, Minister she is the Interior Minister. She is really conservative, and I really like her. Okay, her politics and my politics are very different, but I don't question her commitment to the importance of the state of Israel. So it's complicated, Aaron, and I think a government now is, for your viewers to know, it's now 60-60, which means they don't have a majority. Very complicated to get things done. They've got people putting pressure on this government every day. But I'm, you know, again, someone who works with them. Probably I work with this government probably than anyone more in the United States does. And, you know, I've been proud to say these people are effective, but they're also my friends.
I mean, I mean, Kissinger was probably more right than wrong, particularly for a small country in a dangerous neighborhood. Consensus is critically important. And no, I don't think any single Israeli party has ever had a outright majority in the Knesset and has never ruled alone. Every Israeli government was a coalition government. So that affects our policies and our interests. But I was going to ask you.
Can I pause you one second? How great is that, though? I mean, how great is that? This is a country of 9 million people. 20% of the country in Israel are Arabs, right? How great this is. And, you know, that, yes, it probably doesn't make for great history books as it relates to how to work together. But this country, it represents a lot of different people, and people don't remember. I have now been introduced to the Druze community and the Arab community in Nazareth. And when I go travel around this country and I see all these different ethnic groups, all living in Israel, all understanding it, it is an important part of who this place is as a country. So yes, it can be maddening for those of us who are supposed to be ambassadors and working with everyone, but it is a pretty interesting place to be.
Right, and the consensus notion is important because it really does create additional constraints on a system to make core decisions. I mean, Israel doesn't have a formal written constitution. And I'm certain that one of the reasons is if the Israelis devoted the kind of time to actually creating a written document on what the state is, what its identity is, where it is, at a time when they were struggling for their independence, they might not have made it. But that creates a certain measure of, an additional constraint on decision making. I was also going to ask you, I spent a fair amount of time myself in various administrations, and it is issue because I do want to get to the issue of peacemaking. And whether or not this is coincidence or not, I mentioned to you this earlier, that the times where there have been tension within the U.S.-Israeli relationship, specifically regarding the pursuit of Arab-Israeli peace, there's also been an incredible amount of progress. Now, Henry Kissinger might say that. Jimmy Carter might say that. James Baker might say that. The three Americans who managed to actually do something. Now, we're going to get to the Abraham Accords, which was a set of agreements reached by an administration in which there was some tension, but very little tension with Israel. But it does raise the question, Tom, that in a negotiation, a mediator, if it's the United States, needs to maintain a certain amount of detachment and independence of decision-making if, in fact, it's ever going to reach an agreement. Kissinger, Carter, and Baker went through a lot of tumult with the Israelis and also with the American Jewish community before they made the progress that they did. So I was just wondering, there is no peace process now, but I wonder if you have any sense that the United States, to maintain its own credibility, needs to maintain a certain amount of detachment as a fair and effective broker between two sides to reach an agreement. Does that resonate at all?
Yeah, I think, listen, I think the president said it well. I mean, I don't think any of us sit around today and think about how we're going to engage ourselves in a massive peace process, okay?
Right.
My objective is to do really a couple things on this. One is to keep the vision of a two-state solution alive. Not very complicated, guys, because keep a vision of a two-state solution alive means you talk about it all the time, and then you got to make sure that the parties don't do things that make that impossible to do, okay? And we know all what those issues are, right? And my job is to limit that, so both from the Palestinians' perspective and what they do or don't do, the Israeli side from what they do and don't do, so people don't give up the vision of this. Because I, as someone who's now been here enough and has studied this enough, the option of a one-state solution is a disaster for a democratic Jewish state, in my humble view. I think shared by many people, not everyone, but a lot of people would envision the same thing. So my objective which is to spend time, obviously making sure that Israel knows that there's an unbreakable commitment to Israel, unbreakable security commitment to the state of Israel, but also try at the same time to help the Palestinian people. And that's actually doing practical things to make their lives better. And that can be anything from, making sure that they have 4G to making sure that their pensions are done, and healthcare and education. This stuff is really, really important to the success of that ability to keep a two-state solution alive. So listen, as we both know, peace processes are complicated, but you can't get to a peace process if the parties want it more than the negotiators want it. And so right now, our job is to make sure that the vision of a two-state solution is alive. In the meantime, the Israelis feel that the Americans are unbreakable, and the Palestinian people believe that the United States is doing things to help their lives just to be that much better.
Right. I think we both agree that the chances of any imminent or foreseeable progress toward a two-state solution right now is not in the cards. So if the administration's objective is to create a better environment, promote security cooperation, economic cooperation between the two sides, if that's the objective, and I think it's logical, particularly for an administration that right now is preoccupied with with issues that are far more threatening to its interests than the pursuit of Israeli-Palestinian peace. But creating a better environment is still a tough proposition. This, as you know, this is not one hand clapping. Palestinians bear their fair share of responsibility for not creating that environment, whether it's incitement or martyrs' payments or violence and terror, and the loss of their monopoly over the forces of violence within their own society. You do not have one gun, one authority, one negotiating position, right? The Israelis obviously do their fair share of things that undermine and prejudge an outcome. You had some pretty tough words, as you know, on settlements in March. before, I think, Americans for Peace Now. You said we can't do stupid things that impede us for a two-state solution. And you rightly talked about prioritizing. You played an important role in preventing E1 from coming to fruition. But help us think through how you look at the issue of Israeli behaviors. You're not the ambassador to the West Bank or Gaza or to the Palestinian Authority. So you're focused largely on Israel. How do you look at the settlements issue?
Well, I mean, the position is quite simple. I represent the United States. The position of the United States has been, from Democrat and Republican presidents for a long time, that we don't support settlement growth. That's not new. That's not a new position. That's been our position and continues to be our position. I think the question for us is going to be what we can do to keep the parties from doing things that impede the ability for a two-state solution. And those are things that I work with the Israeli government and the Palestinians, as you point out. This is, one hand clap is a great way to describe it. Everyone's got faults here. I don't equate one set of issues that the Palestinians do or don't to another one that the Israelis do. Each of them need to be addressed individually, which I try to do. Maybe not always as artfully as I should, but try to do, and to work with each set of priorities. As you know, we have a very robust Palestinian unit in Jerusalem that works very closely with the Palestinian Authority and trying to make life better. And as you know, we've now increased the assistance to the Palestinian people to about $450 million. It was zeroed out during the previous administration. That helps, shows that we're trying to help the Palestinian people. At the same time, we did $1 billion for Iron Dome. So I try to do the best I can. I meet with everyone. I talk to everyone. I try to have an open mind. I don't have an agenda. I think the agenda is a democratic Jewish state and a vision of a two-state solution. It's complicated, but pretty clear articulated.
Yeah. You referred to how and who represents the United States to the Palestinian Authority. Can you give us an update, if there is one, on the prospects for reopening the consulate in Jerusalem? Where does that stand?
We want to open it. We're working with trying to open it. Obviously, we spent a lot of time on the topic. We have nothing new to announce, but we're obviously working on it. Would like to open it.
But the Israelis clearly don't want it opened. That's
what I've heard.
Right. So when you talk to them about why they don't want it open, what do they say?
Listen, I'm not going to speculate what the reasons are rational. We, as a government, would like to open it, and we're working with the Israeli government to accomplish that goal.
Okay. Let's move on to Iran.
That's an easy topic.
It's not your brief. Our mutual friend, Mr. Malley, is
sadly it's everyone's brief.
Is working on that. The Biden administration clearly wants to see a return to the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran nuclear agreement. The Israelis are less enthusiastic, to say the least, about entering into another agreement. How do you try to manage that gap, which is there? I must say, and you were right, the Bennett government has been much more adroit and smart about how they express their opposition, and consultations between the U.S. and Israel are exceedingly close. How do you manage that? Because that is, from Israel's point of view, an existential issue, probably the most important security issue that they face. How do you begin to manage it and maintain a sense of trust and confidence?
Okay, let's step back for 1 second. So it's obviously way more about this than most people in their life will know. So as you know, the Obama administration negotiated at the JCPOA. It certainly wasn't perfect. We can have a long debate about its faults or its successes, but it was what it was. It was one of the things that I think one of the critiques, we can argue appropriate or not. One of the critiques was that the Israelis were surprised. They weren't engaged in the process. They woke up one day and realized that we were negotiating with the Iranians, and they were unhappy about that. President Biden made it very clear to all of us, especially those who were in the midst of negotiations, that there would be no daylight between Israel and the United States vis-a-vis what was going on in Vienna on the diplomatic route, the trying to get back into JCPOA. He made that commitment going into the administration, and we have fulfilled that 100%. I don't think you could bump into an Israeli military national security advisor that wouldn't say that they've been completely involved and engaged on every step of the way that we're attempting to try to come back into the JCPOA. I am in no way suggesting that they like it. That's a different issue. Or they're still 100%. But I think it's a very important thing because it creates trust. Trust is very important. And I think that's what the president committed to. Jake Sullivan has been in the midst of all of this. Brett McDurk, who has been the lead on this, working with Rob Malley and our negotiators and Barbara Lee. We've been all over this. Okay. We are where we are. If you believe what you read in the New York Times, the administration continues to want to have a diplomatic solution to what I believe is an enormous problem, which is the aggression of Iran. But regardless if we get a diplomatic solution, the president's been very clear, we will not stand by to let the Iranians obtain a nuclear weapon. He's said it multiple times. The Secretary of State has said it. We've all said it. And we'll work with the Israelis to accomplish that. The Israelis obviously have every ability to defend themselves, and we never tie the hands of the Israelis as it relates to their own defense. So, stay tuned. I mean, listen, obviously, we're still working the diplomatic channels. The Iranians know what they need to do vis-a-vis if we're going to come back and get a JCPOA complete or a JCPO 2.0, whatever you might want to do or call it. So we're working collectively with the Israelis. But the most important thing is there's no daylight about what's going on with this government, with the United States. I think that's very important in building trust.
And again, I'm not asking you to divulge any confidential conversations. But
oh, yes, you are. Yes,
no, I'm
you
not.
are,
I'm not. I wouldn't expect that you would. But I'm just trying to understand the logic here. The agreement, let's be clear, is a highly flawed, if functional, enterprise. It's designed to buy time. It can't stop the Iranians from enriching. It may constrain their capacity to do so. But when the Israelis say to you, we're against the agreement, do they also identify what are the implications of no agreement? I mean, I guess that's my question. This is a very pragmatic, practical government, particularly on the security side, the security types. I'm just wondering, no agreement might lead to Iran's ramping up and effort to weaponize, or it might not. They don't see it as the lesser of two bad outcomes, though, correct?
I have an enormous confidence in the state of Israel's ability to take care of themselves. Okay? Mm-hmm. They have a robust intelligence gathering, military operation, sophistication level that next to the United States is pretty spectacular. So I think that the Israelis and their government have all sorts of contingent planning going on. Door number 1, door number 2, door number 3. I think they understand the risks. Listen, they live with this every day, every single day. I talked to the Prime Minister. I talked to Defense Minister Gantz. Their responsibility is to protect the people of Israel, and I'm enormously confident they have plans in which to do that. We believe, if we could, we should try to attempt to have a diplomatic solution. You're 100% right. This is not a good situation. We can debate how we got here. We can debate should the agreement ever been ripped up in the first place. I'm not going to sit here and do revisionist history and where we are and how far along this program is. I think you can read about that in the New York Times. You don't have to listen to the American ambassador to Israel explain that to you. But it's a serious issue. We're working closely with Israelis, and we stand by and stand ready with Israel to make sure that Iran does not obtain a nuclear weapon. Full stop.
Okay. The clock is ticking down. There are just a couple more questions I wanted to ask. One is Ukraine. Clearly, the Israelis have a variety of interests that they need to protect. Syria, the state and fate of Ukrainian Jews, Russian Jews, with perhaps Syria being paramount. And from what I understand, there is lockstep cooperation between the administration and the Bennett government on Ukraine. But let me ask you flat out, as America's closest ally, and as the only democracy with all of its imperfections in this region, and as a country that whose origins partly were driven by the genocide of 6 out of every 7 Jews in Europe during the Holocaust, is there any sense of disappointment on the part of the administration that the Israelis have not been? I understand they have their own interests. Everybody has their own interests. That the Israelis haven't been more forthcoming and willing to do more. I know they set up a field hospital. I know they provide humanitarian assistance. I know they're now considering non-lethal military assistance to Ukraine. But I just wonder, is there any sense that they could be doing more, particularly on sanctions or dealing with the oligarchs?
We're in constant communication with the Israelis on this topic, daily, sometimes hourly. Bennett's conversations with Putin were all cleared and worked on with the administration. Everything we've asked Israelis to do, they have done. We feel very confident the role that Israel is playing vis-a-vis Ukraine is in close lockstep with the United States. So my very simple view is, yes, they're uniquely positioned in both ways, uniquely positioned to have influence over the Russians vis-a-vis the relationships. They're also uniquely vulnerable given the fact that the Russians are on their northern border. But there is nothing, that we have not asked the Israelis to do that they haven't fulfilled. And we are lockstep in our commitment to end this war. And, as you know, just, 2 days ago, the foreign minister, Lavrov made some insanely stupid comments about Zelensky, and it was condemned by the strongest terms by the prime minister and the foreign minister, obviously the world community. Lavrov sounded like a guy who's losing the war. But regardless of that, we're lockstep. We feel comfortable with the Israelis' position vis-a-vis Ukraine.
Okay, final question in the minute that remains. The president will be visiting you, perhaps among other places, sometime in June. Hasn't been confirmed. He's proposed Bennett's invited. And again, I asked this question without expecting any sort of answer that would compromise any discrete conversations. But if you, the U.S. ambassadors, were giving the president one piece of advice, not on private diplomacy, but on one impression you hoped he would leave in this region after his trip, what do you think he'd want to convey more than anything else?
Well, let's talk about the trip to Israel when and if it gets confirmed. It's very simple to me. This guy gets it. He understands the Middle East. He understands the complications. He understands the history. He's been in the room. He's made the decisions. He knows the players. He's known every prime minister from Golda Meir. It is not uncommon that he knows the regional players in a huge way, and he understands it. He's been there when they made the big decisions, for good and for bad. He's got the battle scars to prove. For people to understand this president has an unbreakable commitment to the state of Israel, I think that's exceptionally important, right? I mean, we're looking back at the history of this guy and how many times he's been to Israel. I mean, it's remarkable. Okay, so the Israeli people need to understand that this is who he is, and I think they all understand that fundamentally. But we have to obviously make sure they understand it's in his. He calls himself a Zionist, right? He calls himself a committed Zionist to this place. On a broader set of points, of the broader set of the region, I think people understand they're playing with a guy who has been around. This is when age is beneficial. Okay, he's been around. He's seen it. He's been at the forefront of every military confrontation, every arms sale, every foreign activities, sales of arms to countries. He's been a part of every part of this. You're dealing with a president of the United States who is engaged in the Middle East, who cares about the Middle East, understands it's important to the Middle East. And for me, my advice is to make sure everyone sees that and understands it, because it happens to be factual.
That is, in essence, I would argue, in anticipation of this trip, the message that precisely needs to be conveyed. Because as the Eagles sang in Hotel California, you can check out any time you want, but you can never leave. And we may think we're done with the Middle East, but clearly the Middle East is not done with us. Mr. Ambassador, I want to thank you on this very busy day. Come visit.
By the way, my friend, when I say the following, come visit, I actually mean it.
Okay? Yeah, I'll try.
So you, my friend, you have a real invitation. Okay?
I appreciate that.
I wish I had a house for you to hang out with, but that's for your next chapter of your book. But right now, we're not going to get into that because it will make me cry. But my important thing is, please come see me. You've been a great friend. I appreciate you every day. Please call me with advice and counsel, because there's no one smarter on these issues than you are. So I'm honored that you even let me spend a few minutes with you, and thank you for everything you've done for me.
The feelings are mutual, Mr. Ambassador, and thanks again for sharing your time, your expertise, your candor with the audience and with Carnegie. Just one brief note for anyone who's still on this call. May 16th, I'll be sitting down with David Axelrod for a conversation about how foreign policy, Ukraine, fits into domestic politics and the upcoming midterm. So until that time, Mr. Ambassador, thanks again. Goodbye. Have a terrific day, or what's left of it, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you, buddy.
Take care.